We're moving now to the second speaker, Kim Harris. She came all the way from Germany this morning, although I was recently at another conference about diaspora and so on, and she's one of those from the diaspora, Canadian diaspora, living in Germany for many years. She's got her own company, and she's been working in localization for many years. She's been heavily involved as well in raising the visibility of translation in the field of localization, and she was an active member of GALA until very recently, and is still pretty committed to developing things in this field. She's also one of the expert consultants of the European Union in the project called LeanWeb, the language industry's platform, where she's an advisor on this particular area. And she's going to be talking today broadly about localization and crossing boundaries in translation.
Just to give you a bit of background as to my expertise, if you may, in this field. We've had an in-house multimedia localization department since 2009, so for the past 5 years. And we work with a network of voice talents in over 20 languages. We have our own in-house studio. And it was ramping up a department like this is extremely complex, not least because of many of the things that Miguel said about the incredible number of new technologies and tools that you need to use. And the tools are what actually turn our work into something we notice today is very non-standardized. I'd like to just give you a bit of background on the complexity that we have to deal with every day when we work with multimedia and multimedia localization. We have assets. We call them assets because they're basically the project that the client will give us. It's a finished project in English normally, sometimes German, but mostly in English. And we have to deal with all sorts of pieces of that puzzle that need to be localized or that need to be integrated into the localization at a later time. You have to deal with things like time and space, synchronous recording, the consistency in audio and video, making sure that whatever is spoken and shows up on the screen is consistent with each other, trying to coordinate those things. And then there are, of course, cultural considerations, standards such as the use of numbers or the use of imagery in the videos, making sure that you're not, that you're very sensitive to cultural sensitivity, basically. I wanted to, we're hoping this is going to work, give you a couple of practical examples of some videos that we've localized, and some of the things that we came across that were, that are difficult. And when you look at these videos, you don't actually think that it can be that difficult. So the first example is an animated infographic that we did into several languages. I think we did it into 24 languages, including Colombian Spanish. That seems to be the Spanish that many companies choose because it's, they say, the purest of the Spanish versions. I know, but that's what they want. So French, Japanese, Russian, and Chinese. The video software that we used was After Effects. The interesting thing about the infographics is that what we get from the client is a PDF and some animation that we have to work with. That didn't look like it would be too difficult to localize, did it? We've got lots of space on the screen. Numbers are pretty big.
Not much text.
Not much text, so you would think. But, of course, that's not actually the case. The length of the on-screen text, when you're actually having to put the text into the videos or into the PDFs, because we had to work with both. Some languages are 30 to 50% longer than English. English is a very short language. So you have you need to make sure you have a lot of space. And what we ended up having to do for both the videos and the PDFs was to make the graphics smaller. I think because the text in English is okay, but the Russian takes up an entire additional line. So we had to make the graphics smaller in order to be able to fit the text in, and of course it doesn't look as good anymore either. So this always comes back to the translators, because what we end up having to do oftentimes is ask the translators to shorten the texts. So when you're a multimedia translator, this is part of your job. You have to, you're constantly, it's not like Miguel said with the games, you don't just get a file. You can't just get a file. You have to have the assets, and you have to be able to look at them and see them and understand what the source is, look at what the source is, and try and fit the target into the source, which makes it somewhat like subtitling. You have a little more room to breathe than with subtitling, but it's still very, very complex. And another thing that's very interesting about the numbers. In Asian languages, you cannot do what we did with the English. You cannot have the numbers pop up and then have the text, or have the text and have the numbers pop. Well, you can have the numbers pop up and then the text, but you can't have the text and then the numbers, because in the Asian languages, you have to incorporate the numbers in the text, which we didn't have to do in English. And you don't have to do it in French, and you don't have to do it in German. But the numbers are always part of the text. You can't write the text without the numbers, because it doesn't make sense. So we had to figure out how best to do that with the infographics, not necessarily with the PDFs. It worked fine with the PDFs as long as we had the numbers there. With the Asian languages was to actually have them come up as a flip number, as you probably saw at the very end of that video. So what we were able to do was have the numbers come up first, and have them flip like a flip chart as we were bringing up the text. So that was the only way that we could that it actually made sense, because in the Japanese we had the numbers actually in the text. So when we were bringing up the text, we couldn't have the number first. We had to have the text and the number come up after we could see the text. So as easy as it looked, it really wasn't. And in a lot of cases, we have to adjust the text layout. So that means we have to look at how big the graphics are, how much text is on the page. We have to go back to the reviewers and the translators. Sometimes we even have to lengthen the video, because especially as we did with the Japanese, when we're doing the flip charts with the numbers, we're actually making the video a little bit longer. So we have to either make the music slower, or loop the music, so that we're looping the music in another loop. We also have to adjust the graphics, and in some cases, as for the Asian languages, we had to change the order of the elements. Now, this is a really big problem with a lot of languages, because a lot of times the elements that are on screen and what's being spoken, for example, correlate with each other. And that means that you can't actually change the order of things. You have to try and keep it in the order in which it actually is written or spoken. And that's difficult in a lot of languages, because they don't do it that way. So if you're a multimedia localizer, if you're translating multimedia content, this is one of the things you have to be very sensitive to. And if you find that you have to change the order of things, then you have to be working very closely with your customer, basically, to sensitize them to the fact that you're going to have to change some things. The second example I wanted to show you is an e-learning video that we did. And again, it's going to look like, I hope I can this up for you. It's going to look like it's really, really easy. But when you look at the scope of localization that I have on here, we did transcription, text extraction, we had time coding, translation, we had to review it. We do length checks with the spoken text on screen. We have to import text and edit. There's the voice recording that we had to do. You have to edit the video. It's extremely intricate.
Intellectual property is protected by law. Copyright law protects literary and artistic works, including software. Trademark law protects words, phrases, product names, symbols, and logos. Lesson 3. Employees may gather and use non-confidential information about competitors, including what's found on competitors' publicly accessible websites. However, employees are legally prohibited from the following: collecting confidential competitive information, making untrue statements about competitors, gathering competitive information in breach of any contract.
And essentially everything except for a human being as a speaker, which would just make it even worse, or even more difficult. Worse is probably the wrong word, but more difficult. All of the pieces were there. So we had graphics that came up. We had music. We had two audio tracks. So we had the music that came in at the same time as the image, that went down again before the next image came in. So if we had to do any lengthening of any parts of those screens, that meant that we also had to be working with the audio. You have to make sure that when your voice talents are actually doing the recording, that they can actually see these things and they know you don't record at the same time as the video's playing. I mean, they do the recording and then we have to plug the recording into the video at the exact time that it's supposed to be there. And we have to make sure that the length isn't too long, because in a video like that, you would have to lengthen too many things. So it would make it very difficult. So again, you're working with the translators to try and make sure that the text fits. So the strategies, that's what my team calls them, strategies. I call them challenges because I don't know how they do them. But they do them really well. And it's the control during recording, the lengthening of videos, the syncing of audio and video, and the graphics. And of course the audio post-editing, which comes in when the audio is too long for the text. Too short can also be a problem, but it isn't as much of a problem as it being too long. So when we work with our clients, this is what we try to make sure they understand before they go into, when we get the project, some of the things that they should be looking at, or if they work with us on consulting about some of the issues that we come up with localization. And this is for anyone who wants to work in multimedia translation. These are essentially the things that you also need to be aware of when you're doing the translation. Using symbols, for example. This is a good example because essentially everyone knows that it's money, and you've got different types of monetary symbols being used. This is not good because in some countries you don't have Twitter, for example. Some countries don't use Facebook. So using symbols like these that are very sort of European or North American centric would not work in other cultures. So these are things you have to be aware of. As I said before, making sure that you have enough time on these screens. So if you're using English as your source language, you always have to make sure when you're creating your video that there's enough space for longer languages, not only in written text but also in spoken, because even those that are that are written longer are often also spoken longer. And sometimes we have to tell the speakers, the voice talents, to speak fast, which isn't great, but it's a lot more effective than sometimes having to lengthen the video, because it often doesn't work. This is a really good example of what not to do. You've got these bubbles, and these bubbles move down onto the to the green ones. So you can't actually even make them bigger. So you can't really work with the graphics here. You can only work with the text. And when you've got the English text already squished onto the screen, it's going to be really hard for the translator, for you, to actually make it make sense in that small space. So when you see things like this, it's always good, if you are working with your clients, to, you know, make them aware of the fact that if they're going to do this, either make the bubbles big enough, making sure that you're leaving at least 20% space for other languages, or to cut down on whatever it is that they're writing in their bubbles, because it makes it very difficult. One of the things that we come across very often is that our clients tend to like to use uneditable text. So if they'll take a screenshot of a screenshot of a screenshot, and we have to do the same thing, basically. So we can't actually go in and edit the text. Translators can't go in and edit the text, and it makes it difficult for a translator to actually even work with that, and us as well. So, and when they're using this material that has now been embedded in their video, all we can do is do a still. So we just have to overlay that with a still. We can't actually do the graphic images anymore, because it doesn't work, because we don't have them. Yes, use few abbreviations. This is another very North American-centric or English-centric thing that we tend to do and take for granted, that other people do it as well, and they don't. So when you're working with abbreviations, especially in spoken text, but of course also here, but especially in spoken text, we say NDA, but the French say accord de non-divulgation, and that is approximately 1.5 seconds longer than NDA. So if you're trying to get a French person to say that really fast, in order to be able to cut down on that time, it can be very complicated. Now, that said, the voice talents, most of the voice talents that are out there now, the semi-professional and the professional, are very sensitive to all of this, and they're very, very good at what they do. So they know when you tell them these things now. But it is a business, as Miguel said as well, it is one that is very new, and so, you know, the tools and the things that you need to be able to use and do are, they're also new, and they're also new to translators, because this is all about our business of translation, really. Good readability of spoken text is one of the things that the translators have to be very aware of. These are things that, yeah, I'm almost done. These are things that the voice talents have to be able to it has to flow and has to read well when the speakers speak. I just wanted to give you 2 examples of scripts, how we script things, because this is really the most important part of the multimedia translation process. And you have your loops, which is like your parts of the video. This is what you would see on screen, and this is what you would see in the localized version. Now, what we've done is we also have the voices, so you know, and the color coding is for the different voices, so that the translators can see that. Now, what we've done in this column is we've taken the spoken text, and we've highlighted. In the top one, you can see there are 2 slashes. For some of the languages, when we need to know where line breaks are, we've added coding in there, so that when we do that because, you know, my team doesn't speak Japanese, so they have to know exactly where the line breaks are in order for it to come up properly. And also the bold text in the spoken correlates with text that you see on screen. So you know that this has to be consistent with what you see on screen. If you don't do these things, then what might happen is that what the translator translates for the spoken text won't be the same as what you're seeing on screen. And as we saw in that last video, it's extremely important that is consistent with what you see there, because the terminology has to be consistent, The tone of voice and the style has to be consistent. Everything has to be consistent. And this is obviously the translation. Just told you about that. And this is what it would look like, the first part. This is the Japanese, and we had to use line breaks here, as you can see. So you need to be able to use these things in order to be able to understand and make it look like it's supposed to. So the translator's job is, of course, a major job, and you have to be checking the lengths of everything. And in this Excel spreadsheet, what we've done here is taken the length of it's the spoken text. So you have spoken text in the master and spoken text in the target. And we ask the translators to measure themselves, so they have to speak it and use stopwatch. Now there are stopwatch, there's technology for that, so it's part of the job. And then we do the same thing, and you can see in the last column, we time it using, it's machine spoken text, basically. And anything that comes up red is too long. So we either have to go back and work with the translator and ask them to shorten it, or we have to look and see if the video can be lengthened. So there's a lot of technology that plays into here. This is not all done manually. It's done, we do use a lot of technology, and so do the translators as well. So there are there's lots of free software out there that you can use to actually work with this. I basically said all of that already. So at the end of the day, it's all about definition of tasks and finding the right tools, making sure that you're understanding how complex this actually is. Multimedia localization is really very, very complex. There's hardly anything is standardized. You can have different audio quality. The quality of your output can be so diverse, and the tools that you can use as well. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge that we have as localizers, as translators in this industry, is actually trying to find the tools that we can use to work and find a niche in this industry. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was fascinating, actually, to look into the processes in detail. And as Jorge said, I realize, and it's very obvious, that we as translators have to go through a massive learning curve and become more holistic and know more about technology. But what is your experience in terms of educating customers and clients? Because you focused a little bit on that, but what is your experience in how receptive they are to the fact that language and translation is not just a service, but they have to sort of work holistically with us as well and accommodate it? Because in my field, I haven't found much responses from customers, so I just wanted to see what you know in that respect.
I think in traditional translation, the problem is that a lot of clients don't have anything to compare themselves to others with. And with the dawn of multimedia and YouTube channels, and clients being able to compare themselves to their competition in terms of the quality of the output that they've got up there, it's a lot easier to convey the message that quality makes sense, because you can actually visualize it, which is hard to do when you're talking. Which is hard to do. Should I whisper? Which is hard to do when you're really only talking about two software products or two manuals that you're trying to compare. The product, because it's not the product itself. It's actually the video. So it is actually a lot easier at the moment. And we found that clients are a lot more willing to invest money in multimedia translation, which doesn't mean that it makes it any easier to do, but it is much more rewarding because you get to see what you're actually doing.
Could you explain a little bit the difference between localization and transcreation?
I can try. multimedia localization is essentially a little bit of transcreation because it is marketing. And we would consider marketing transcreation because oftentimes it's not only the text, but it's the voice and the style and there's between German and English, for example, transcreation is the Germans always tend to see everything in the positive and the Americans in the negative. So the Americans would say, you should be afraid of this and that's why you have to do it. And the Germans would say, this is really good, that's why you have to do it. So that would be sort of the transcreation thing. It would happen here, but in multimedia, at the moment, you don't have as much of that because it's very expensive to do. Because then what you're doing is you're changing everything. You're not only changing text, but you're changing imagery, you're changing everything. So that is done very high level in marketing. If you look at some of the things that Bebo do for their customers, if you look at MasterCard, for example, that will be serious transcreation. Even in the MasterCard channel on YouTube, you'll find it's completely different. Coca-Cola is the same, and it's complete transcreation because they will adapt everything. They'll have different images, they'll have different text, they'll have different music, everything is different. But when you're looking at infographics or e-learning material, you're not going to get an awful lot of that right now.